questions for Coach. Over here to the left, Bill Rabinowitz, and then Bill, just pass it behind you, then when you're done.
Ryan, could you just kind of give your assessment of the quarterback play today, particularly Julian and Lincoln?
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers were. Do we have the numbers?
I'll get them here.
Okay, yeah. I felt like, Lincoln settled down after the first drive or so, made some nice throws. But I thought Julian, for the most part, early on was in rhythm and moved the team down the field for a couple touchdowns, which was good. Made some nice throws. There's certainly a lot to grow from, and this is why we did this. You can see it was a fairly significant emphasis on throwing the ball to see how the quarterbacks were going to respond, and so we'll use this as another evaluation tool because right from the jump, from when we got off the bus to when we just finished there, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we did the spring game. I wasn't sure, but it was definitely the right thing to do. I wish we could have stayed out there for another 4 hours and gotten these reps and getting these guys some work. On defense, the guys were very, very vanilla. You can see it was really two coverages all day in one front, which is not what we saw all spring. But I felt like for the most part we got a chance to have some film to evaluate, see how the quarterbacks handled themselves in front of the crowd, and kind of go from there and build from it. So what we'll do next week is we have our post-spring evaluations for all guys and go through and figure out what they did well and what they need to improve on as we head into the summer.
Over here to the right, Austin Ward.
Ryan, I know that the practices we see are just, a fraction of the total piece. Like Julian seemed much more accurate, poised, in command than he was in the last couple times we saw him. What allows that to happen? Have there been more good days than bad, or what was maybe different, you think, today?
I wish I could put my finger on it. There was
Dylan, go ahead.
good days, there was bad days, there was somewhere in between, and I think it's just a matter of playing the game. And that's why I think we've talked about this spring. As the spring's gone on, I've just realized that at all positions, but most importantly at quarterback, we have to continue to play 11-on-11 football. And you can see the growth. You saw some growth even in the short amount of time that you guys were able to watch some of the practice this spring. We have the ability to watch them on a daily basis, see them grow. And I wish I could say, hey, we need to get better at like 1, 2, and 3, but I know we just need to play football with these guys. We're young. We have a lot to work on, but I will say there was growth today.
I'm going to just read these off unofficially. Lincoln, 12 of 18, 158, 2 TDs. Julian, 17 of 24, 175, 1 TD. And Tavian, 11 for 15, 116, 1 TD. Cameron Teague Robinson, The Athletic.
It's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Lincoln Keenholz, 12 of 18, 158, and 2. Julian, 17 of 24, 175, and 1 TD. And Tavian, 11 of 15, 116, 1 TD. Cam?
Ryan, CJ had that good drive on that first touchdown run, I think it was, and then James had some good runs. You got Bo involved. I'm curious as what you've seen from this running back group from beginning of spring to now, and how comfortable you feel with the depth you have, even though you have some young guys behind them.
Hard to tell with running backs until you're actually taking them to the ground. As you know, James and CJ got a limited amount of reps. You saw Sam run. You got a chance to see some of the guys get some work in there. I thought Bo Jackson really grew as the spring went on. I don't know until we start tackling guys and getting to games with James and with CJ, but I feel like they're in command. I think James has a chance to be a special back, but still just hasn't played a whole bunch of football. But he's got great energy. He's really matured. He's very coachable. He's seen the way it's supposed to look. He knows what the standard is. So I feel solid about where we're at, but I know this has to be a big spring. I feel like we have what we need there. We just need to continue to build.
Over to the right, Dylan Davis, and then Noah.
Speaking of having what you need there, you've talked about the defensive line depth and needing to see more there. As the spring comes to a close and the portal opens, do you feel like you have what you need at defensive line right now, or is that something you look for?
I think we got to take a hard look at it. Yeah, I don't think I have the answer right now, but we got to look at it. It seemed to me like there was just a lot of knockback on the offensive side of the ball here, but then again, I don't want to make any judgments until I watch the film.
Rob Aller over to the left.
Yeah, Ryan, like you said, saw Julian was pretty poised, but he's also not short, but the shorter quarterback than you maybe have coached. Do you have to do anything special, anything different He had one tipped, I saw.
Yeah, I mean that's a part of it. You know, when you're not 6'4" like Will or Dwayne was, or even 6'3" the way that Justin and CJ were. You know, Kyle was about 6'3". So, what does that mean? Well, you're in the trees. You have to find passing lanes. Does it affect how we call plays? Not really. I mean, there's certainly things that is easier to do than others, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of guys his stature that are playing, in the NFL and have played a lot of high level of college football. So he's certainly tall enough, but you need to get your elbow up. You need to play big. I think that's, what does that really mean? We could probably talk about it for an hour, but when you're not 6'4", you got to play big, and that means your elbows have got to be above your shoulder. You have to see, the passing lanes, and all those things are important. So, we're not allowed to get tip balls. Like, that's part of the deal when you're a smaller quarterback. So, I think he's done a better job with his body. I think he's moving better. So that's all good. But again, it goes back to 11-on-11 football, not 7-on-7, not routes on air. That's not football. And again, I don't want to get into this, but this is like something that's just like front and center in my mind, is that when you play basketball, baseball, lacrosse, you're playing like 7 games on a weekend. These guys play like 12 to 13 games a year of 11-on-11 padded live football. That's it. So, playing in 7-on-7, that's great. That's not football. The throws that you're making aren't real because there's a 6'5" tackle and a guy over here that's trying to rip your head off. So, the more we can create those environments for our guys, the more they'll figure it out. And good athletes like Lincoln and Julian and Tavian, they figure it out over time. You just have to continue to find ways to get out there. So I wish we had 15 more practices in the spring to get out there and learn and grow from, but I think there has been progress made.
Over to the right, Noah Weiskopf, the Lantern.
Ryan, Milan looked pretty explosive today. Just how have you seen him develop through the spring? And then, how important is it for him to just keep getting these reps in these kinds of settings?
Huge. He's another guy who just needs to play football. His route running is excellent. His athleticism is excellent. His attention to detail is excellent. The biggest thing with Milan has been just finishing the catches, which you saw him do some today. That's been his emphasis. Finish contested catches, catch it clean, and then put the ball away. He had the big run after the catch. That ball was loose. You could see it. So he's got to learn to tighten that up. But I think he has a bright future here. I think he's grown. He's gotten better. He's serious about his work. He knows what he has to work on, but he has all the tools it takes to be the next great one.
Joey Kaufman, the Dispatch.
Ryan, Max Clare had his touchdown where he looked like he almost lined up as like a slot receiver, kind of moving there. What is he giving you at that tight end position? Maybe that's different than what you've had. And can you just Will's status at all, just his long term?
Not long term. We should have a full summer with Will. Max. You can see all the tight ends getting involved today. I think Keenan's done a nice job of putting that room together. You see the way Jelani's working. You see, the way Nate was making catches, and then you have Max. It's quick to point out how quick Max gets down the field, how quick he is in and out of his breaks, his ball skills. We're going to work really hard this summer on some of his route running and how he does that. But he's going to be a weapon for us here in the fall. But I think that whole room has really grown. So. They're making a push to be in 12 personnel more this season.
Stephen Means, Cleveland.com.
You're talking about it, regardless of who the quarterback is, it's going to be a smaller guy than Will was. So speaking the tackle depth with Ethan, it seems like Austin's probably set there at this point with Phillip and Ian. How do you feel about your tackle depth right now coming out of the spring?
Solid. We still got to grow. We got to build. I remember where Paris was that third year when he made that jump to left tackle. I felt like coming out of the spring, I was like, man, he's like 2 years away, and he ends up being the first pick in the draft. So there's still some ground to be made up here this summer. I think, again, our guys have done a good job of, like we talked about, having a primary position and a secondary position. So you're seeing some guys move around. And so I think, we're going to have what we need there eventually. We'll probably end up having 4 tackles. And that's what we need to make it through a season. So, I think we'll figure that out in the postseason or the post-spring meetings and figure out what to work on. It's not a finished product yet for sure. But again, I feel like those guys have made strides. They've gotten better. And, in the good-on-good situations that we've seen this spring, they've really competed.
Over to the left, Dan Hope, 11 Warriors.
Ryan, you've talked a lot about how you wish you had more practices. You obviously went into the spring kind of thinking you were going to hold guys back, and that obviously changed. What do you feel like you kind of learned from these last 4 weeks, and how will that maybe, advise the way you handle things going into preseason camp or even going into next year?
Well, we know who our first opponent is, so we know we have to hit the ground running. We don't have the luxury of kind of easing into the season. Not that that's even really the case. I shouldn't say that, but you know what I'm talking about. So, the margin for error, I guess, is the best way to look at it. I think the first thing you notice about this team is they compete, they're competitive, they're edgy. I think, once you get past some of the guys who have played football here with the ones, it quickly gets inexperienced fast. But even the guys who are going to be starters next year, they haven't played a lot of football as starters. They played football, but not as starters. That's a whole different deal. I mean, you have to produce regularly. You have to be able to handle an increased number of snaps at a high level. It's a whole different deal. And so, because we lost talent, but more importantly, we lost experience. We're still talented, but we lost the experience. And every time you go out there, you're either remembering or you're learning. We have a lot of guys learning right now. We do. And so we got to just accelerate that learning process and, figure out what that plan is here this summer and how we do that. And our off-season program still got to be, as hard as ever. And then as we get into preseason, we got to do a great job of making sure, again, we're creating as many game situations as possible.
Spencer Holbrook, Letterman Row.
Ryan, I know you said that you guys were kind of pass heavy today, but what can you learn about Brian as a play caller with what you saw from him today and the cadence at which he did all of that?
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think even for him to do it for the first time out there was a good process for him. There's some things in there that we got to talk about, but overall, I think he had a good plan. You could tell that he had thought through some of the scenarios in his head because he had the calls ready to go. And then, you find yourself in situations where, you're thinking or watching the game as opposed to getting on to the next call. That's all part of the process. But, I thought he had a good rhythm today. I thought he had a good plan. Things moved pretty smoothly overall. Nothing's perfect. But I was not on the headset on purpose because I just didn't want, that kind of distraction for him. And I thought he did a good job. But we'll keep growing. We'll keep learning from it. And then we also have the preseason scrimmages that we'll have here once we get to the preseason to continue to learn and try to get him in more and more situations calling it. But a big part of it, as we've talked about before, is the organization going into it. If you're organized going in, it's probably going to be well organized during a game.
Steve Hellwagen, 24/7.
Logan George felt like he got pretty consistent pressure for the defense up front. May have had 3 of the sacks, although a couple of them just touch football. But has he been a pretty consistent force up there throughout the spring?
I think so, and I think we got to figure out how we can best utilize Logan this fall. So that's going to be a topic of conversation. What's the best fit? How does he fit? What's his role? Because he has strong hands. He's got physicality to him. And when he first came here during those 2 weeks leading into the playoffs, or during the playoffs, our guys had a hard time blocking him. You could recognize he had heavy hands. And so, you've seen some of that this spring, but now I think he's been, 15 practices in. So we'll see how that fits. And I think we need to figure out how his role is going to be described to him as we come out of the spring.
Tony Girdman, Buckeye Huddle, and then Joe.
Ryan, regarding the portal and, say, position groups, how does the conversation go? How does it evolve from, say, late February, early March to next week? Like, what takes place with you and your coaches?
Well, you try to go through the spring, get the grades, because we try to grade as many things as we can, figure out where those are at, and try to identify where everybody's at in terms of the depth. If there's a hole in there that needs to be filled, then we'll go ahead and fill it.
Is there any conversation before the spring game or before these 15 practices?
I'm sure. I think you talk about your depth a lot, but one of the things for us is, like, we're 2 down in the offensive line. There's a couple positions that we actually don't have, our number because of the way it was designed coming out of last year. I think you remember the portal opened and closed before we were done with our last game. Then it was open for 5 days after the national championship game. And I know no one feels bad for us, but the whole country got to pick off our players, which they did. And so because of that, we weren't able to replace them. So we need to do some of that anyways in our depth chart. Knowing that it looks like this summer we're going to have to get to 105, which is a whole nother conversation.
Go ahead.
Coach, you talked about your offensive tackles. What about your interior line, guys like Luke Montgomery? What's your assessment on Luke so far?
I didn't watch the interiors much. We got a lot of double teams because of the style of defense that we're seeing today. So those guys had to take on a lot of double teams. But I thought we got to the second level pretty well. I think Tyler and Marcus and Charlie, those guys, all three of them have done a great job. It's the first time we ever had like 3 guys involved with the offensive line. Because of the new rule with unlimited coaches, it's allowed them to attack that room. And when you think about 5 guys on the field at once, almost 20 guys in a room, it makes sense. And I think that they feel like they're getting better. The guys who returned, Luke and Carson and Tegra and those guys, I think they're feeling more and more comfortable with what we're doing. Again, we'll have to assess all that and figure out exactly what the evaluation is. That'll all be explained to them during the post-spring. But good to have guys that have played, and they obviously played good enough to win a national championship last year. So that's good. But that's not our expectations. Our expectations that these guys are All-Americans and first-rounders. So that's why they're here, and that's what they want to be.
Got time for just a couple more. Joe Reedy, Associated Press, and then Tim.
Brian, considering depth issues with the defensive line and what you were able to play today, how much was Matt able to install what he wants to do during these practices, and where do you think, in terms of install, you are going into the fall?
Yeah, we put a lot in. He's put a lot in. He and Tim Walton worked hard to figure out, what would fit our guys. So we've been seeing a lot of different defenses today. We did not do that. So I think a lot of our install is in. So I feel decent about that. And so, but I think, for our guys, they also have to understand that, the goal isn't for the coaches to call us into the right defense. If we're good and dominant, you should just be able to play, a couple defenses and play a couple coverages at Ohio State and win with technique. So that's sort of the message coming out of the spring. But I feel like we have a good portion of our install done in, but there's certainly things we'll add this preseason.
And final questions, Tim May.
Yeah, I know I say 2 quickies. I'm not trying to be a anachronism here, but 2 quickies. Number one, did you have a talk with Julian maybe after last week's Student Appreciation Day of kind of like getting him going to a certain extent? Because he seemed a lot different, as people have pointed out today, number one. And then number two, when you look at those guys lined up at midfield between the first and second quarter, does it put in stark perspective what a team you had last year, but wow, what you're replacing?
Yeah. First, I think the quarterbacks would tell you that, I have conversations with them on a daily basis, especially when they make mistakes in practice. But it's our job and it's my job to make sure that they understand how hard it is to be the quarterback at Ohio State and the expectations. You are not allowed to lose a game. You're not allowed to have a bad day. And so it's really, really hard. That's just the way it is. But as we know, the rewards are endless. And, Will's a great example of that. CJ is a great example of that. You go through the list. But and so, I think the thing for Julian is, he's realized he's had some good days. He's had some days he's learning from. But a big trait of great quarterbacks is they're resilient and they keep coming back and they keep learning. If you keep making the same mistake over and over again, not good. So, but I think all the guys have been that way this spring. So, but good to see him respond the way he did and rebound from a couple of practices early on. There's no question. Not just the talent, it's the experience. These guys are grown men, and in our recruiting process, we evaluate who the players are in terms of their talent, but then we quickly evaluate who they are as young men. And we try to bring in mature young men because, when you're here at Ohio State, you're held to a higher standard. You got to sit up a little straighter. You got to look people in the eye. You got to make great decisions. And so that's important. And these guys came in that way, but they came in as young men, and now they're men. And you just see them, and you just makes you smile. Not only are they going to be great football players in the NFL, but they're going to be great citizens, great ambassadors of Ohio State, great husbands, great dads, and they're champions. So, it puts a smile on your face when you see it.
Great. Coach, thank you very much.
All right, guys, thanks.